I want to introduce you to a little 8-legged celebrity named Esmeralda. Some of you might have heard or read about Esmeralda, and apologies to any anachrophobes out there if it makes you feel a bit creepy, but this is a little spider who about 6 years ago was part of a NASA experiment at the International Space Station. Now, the experiment that the scientists were looking at is how will a spider react, how will a spider adapt to zero gravity? Because if you think about the way a spider operates, the way a spider builds a web, it all depends on gravity. They lower themselves down, if you've ever watched one, and they build their web that way. The whole thing requires gravity. What will a spider do in zero gravity? Well, apparently Esmeralda, and there were a couple of other spiders, apparently at the very beginning, at their visit to the International Space Station, they were a little bit disoriented and they were a little bit confused and lethargic. But then very quickly, something remarkable happened. That is, Esmeralda started to build a totally different structure of web, a style of web, a construct of web that didn't require gravity. Now, this was an amazing thing for scientists because if you think about the history of spiders, never before has a spider had to build a different style of web. But Esmeralda in zero gravity showed that it is in the DNA of a spider to adapt to zero gravity. Now, there's all kinds of lessons in that, but the intersection of history and possibilities. Esmeralda had a history. It was on Earth. It was building structural webs depending on gravity, but the possibilities for Esmeralda were in zero gravity. And the inspiring idea that webs can be built, a different structure of web. I want to talk this afternoon in the time I have about 3 key phrases when we think about our history and our possibilities, because this is really what motivates us to move from our history into the unknown. Creativity, innovation, and adaptability. First of all, creativity. Quick little story I want to tell you about photography. Around the time of the 1860s, 1870s, photography was starting to become a little bit more commercially available. And in London, England at the time, at the Royal Academy of Art, there was a raging debate among the arts faculty, the artists, the painters, at the Royal Academy of Art, what this innovation of this camera is going to do to art and the world of painting. Some of the faculty members were very fearful. They were very upset by this camera because they thought it was going to throw them all out of work. And you can maybe see how they had a bit of a point. This is a portrait in the realism style that was popular in the 1800s and the 1900s. And I don't know how much in today's dollars it would cost to have this done, but this was not a service for everyone. This was for the royalty. This was for the wealthy class of the nobility, really, to hire an artist to paint a painting of their child. And you think about what a camera can do at the snap of a shutter and a fraction of the costs. So there were these painters that were worried about what photography was going to do. They thought it was going to wipe them out. But there was another group at the faculty, another group of painters that said, no, we don't need to worry about this camera. They basically said the camera has no intrinsic artistic merit to it. They thought people will play around with it for a little while, but they'll get bored with it. It'll be the Rubik's Cube of the 1860s, and that'll be the end of it. Well, in fact, it wasn't the end of it. And in fact, it wasn't the end of painting. Painting in the 20th century took whole new different expressions. And in some ways, the advent of photography liberated painters to move away from realism styles and take on whole new expressions, whole new possibilities that without the camera, possibly, they never would have come about. Now, there were a lot of things going on at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. A lot of social things, a lot of political things that led the world of modern art into these directions. But I still can't help but think that the advent of commercial photography helped nudge painters along into very different forms of creativity. And of course, those other faculty members were wrong too. Painting was not, or photography was not, the Rubik's Cube of its day. It didn't go away. Absolutely in the 20th century with better technology and better techniques. But the point is photography has artistic merit in it as well. But it's the creative spirit within each one of us that led painting into new genres and also photography. Creativity is a boundless resource in every one of us. And it was also a resource in Esmeralda the spider. The next word or phrase that I want to talk about is innovation. Now, innovation is probably one of the most overused words at the moment in business schools and in corporate boardrooms and in government white papers. Everyone wants to be innovative. And absolutely, I guess it's a thing to pursue, but I don't know if we always have a good idea about what innovation is. Innovation is distinct from invention, which is creating something brand new. It's distinct from design improvement, which is taking something that exists and improving the aesthetics of it or the usability of it. Innovation, we could describe that as taking something that already exists and combining it with something else and coming up with a totally new use for it. Take, for example, the horse-drawn carriage. Well, I guess even the horse-drawn carriage is some innovation to it. It is wheels combined with a horse to give us something that had value then. But the horse-drawn carriage, at some point, someone decided, let's combine that with the combustion engine, something that already did exist. Let's combine these two things, and then you get an automobile. That is an innovation, something that added a lot of value and, in fact, transformed the way we transport ourselves. So innovation is another one of those things, combining two things in a creative way to get us something very, very useful, very valuable. Also at the intersection, when we think about our economy, of history and possibilities. But finally, I want to focus on this final word here, adaptability. Now, I'm working on a book with my co-author, who is here this morning, or this afternoon, called Spiders in Space, Stories of Adaptability. We want to focus on 12 or 15 really inspiring stories of Canadians that, like Esmeralda the spider, were able to adapt to very sudden and very unwanted change. I want you to meet, first of all, Michelle Salt. Now, some of you might know this name. Some of you might have met Michelle Salt. Maybe you've heard her speak. She's a Calgarian. Michelle has a fascinating history. As a young woman, she was into everything, all kinds of sports. She was very active, very competitive. She was a fitness model. She was a downhill skier, a motorcycle rider, a successful realtor, and an entrepreneur. She was full of energy and life. But one very tragic afternoon, she was in a motorcycle accident and lost her leg. Now, I don't have time to go into her story, and it's really her story to tell. If you ever get a chance to meet her or hear her speak, inspiring story. But suffice it to say, Michelle is a great example of someone who faced sudden and unwanted change. One morning she's got her leg, the next afternoon she does not. Now you can see her here with her prosthetic leg. And by the way, you know what her Halloween costume is every year? She's the Bionic Woman. I love the spirit of Michelle. When she first got her prosthetic leg, and when Rob and I were interviewing her, she said she used to hide it because she was a little bit embarrassed of it. But very soon on, she came to realize this leg is part of her, and she's going to own it. It kind of gave her this, kind of badass spirit to her. She's the Bionic Woman, she's the Borg. So she's got this fantastic spirit. When her leg was amputated, the doctors told her, they said, well, you might walk with a cane or possibly with a walker, but she lost her leg quite high up, and they basically said, lower your expectations. You were really going to be limited to this. Perhaps think about a desk job. Well, Michelle Salt competed in Sochi in the Paralympics as a snowboarder for Canada, and she's now training to compete in South Korea in 2 years. She did not let any limitations write her possibilities for her. She understood who she was as a person, and that is a competitor. So she was able to adapt remarkably to this prosthetic leg and has an inspiring story. Another Calgarian that I want you to meet, and maybe you know this guy too, his name's Jesse Lumsden. Jesse was a college football player at McMaster University, and when Rob and I interviewed him, he really underplayed his achievements. He said, yeah, I had some success at McMaster in the football program there. And then Rob went and looked at exactly what success was it. And it's full of all these awards and record setting and all these accolades, and he was a star college football player. Went on to play for the Hamilton Rough Riders, the Edmonton Eskimos, and the Calgary Stampeders. A fantastic, talented football player, a fantastic competitor. But Jesse had a problem. He had chronic shoulder injuries. Every so often, his shoulder would get injured, and it would get injured again, and injured again, and injured again, to the point where, at one point, the doctor said, it really isn't much use doing another surgery on your shoulder. You were going to run into this time and time again. And at one point, John Hufnagel, the coach of the Calgary Stampeders, had to have a conversation with Jesse and basically said, in so many words, your career as a football player is over. This is the end of it. That is that sudden and unwanted conversation that Jesse had to realize. But football was part of Jesse's history. But the possibilities for Jesse, now he is an Olympic bobsledder, competed for Canada in the Vancouver and Sochi Games, also training to compete in South Korea, and has had all kinds of World Cup success as a bobsledder. A lot of the same actions, a lot of the same athletic abilities, in football as in bobsledding. The difference is that bobsledding doesn't constantly hit your shoulder and cause you to injure it time and time again. So the point with both Michelle Salt and Jesse Lumsden has to come down to this. They understood their DNA. They understood who they were as individuals. And that isn't necessarily just as a skier. That is as a competitor. That isn't just as a football player. That is as an athlete and now a bobsledder. They understood their story. They understood who they were as individuals, and that helped them adapt to that very sudden and unwanted change, to that motorcycle accident, to that chat with the coach of the Calgary Stampeders that basically said, your history is behind you. But the question mark was, what are the possibilities that lay ahead? It was all about their ability to adapt to that unwanted change. So getting back to Esmeralda then. We've got history. Esmeralda had a history on Earth, spinning her webs as normal, but there were possibilities as well. Are we able to adapt? Every one of us in this room, maybe some of us have had this already happen, are going to face sudden and unwanted change. Hopefully it's not as dramatic as losing our leg in a motorcycle accident, but there is going to come a time for every one of us where it is a phone call, or it is a tap on the shoulder by your boss and you've been downsized, or it is going to be a conversation that you didn't want to have where suddenly everything you knew in your history is now changed. And we are going to look into the unknown, and it can be frightful, and I don't share that to scare anybody, but it is, I think, a reality. Every one of us is going to face sudden and unwanted change. Are we creative? Are we innovative? And most of all, are we adaptable as human beings, just like Esmeralda was, just like Michelle, and just like Jesse were? Histories, we all have our histories. By the end of this afternoon, this wonderful TEDx conference will be a historic event. We all have histories, but we all have possibilities. And therein lies fantastic things to come. Thank you very much.